The early to mid 2010s brought so much important gaming hardware our way. This was a time where many companies tried their hands at the gaming market in ways that were meant to directly compete with consoles, specifically with the PS4 and Xbox One at the height of the end of the console race between the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. As such, Steam machines were meant to bring Steam to your living room, allowing you to play PC games on the big screen in a more suitable form factor. But this idea was quickly power-crept by the lack of demand and prices that made very little sense to the consumer. However, as of 2026, the Steam machine is making a full revival, which brings a few important things into question. Was the Steam machine always doomed to fail, or was it just ahead of its time? In today's mini documentary, we're going to be focusing on the story of Steam machines and how the book is being opened for the idea once more. But will it survive? This concept came about when Gabe Newell, one of the founders of Valve, became concerned that Microsoft's push towards the Windows Store would end up causing PCs to become a closed platform for gaming. So the Steam machine was meant to be a Linux-based system that plays Steam games. However, Valve needed to gauge interest for using a PC as a console, which is just one reason why they launched Big Picture Mode. This mode transformed this Windows app-style interface into a full-screen console-like one that was much more controller-friendly. People's reaction to Big Picture Mode was quite positive, which was helpful in giving Valve the push that they needed to start working on actually selling hardware, but most importantly, implementing their own OS into hardware. Valve announced that they were henceforth working on selling pre-built PCs with Steam pre-installed. But this needed to have an important new operating system in the form of SteamOS, which does run on Linux but offers that big picture experience out of the box, which was the best way of treating your PC like a console with better controller support for navigating menus. Alongside it, Valve also announced the Steam controller. Once this concept was finalized, Valve partnered with different manufacturers to create different versions of the Steam machine, which include iBuyPower, Falcon Northwest, CyberPower, but the most prominent manufacturer, of course, was Dell through Alienware. However, the first demonstration of what the Steam machine could be was Xi3 with the Piston, a very tiny PC that Valve was heavily associated with. As mentioned, Alienware launched their own Steam machine, which featured an Intel Core i3 4130T dual-core CPU, a custom NVIDIA GTX Maxwell GPU with 2 gigs of VRAM, up to 8 gigabytes of RAM, and up to 1 terabyte of storage. Later on, they launched a more powerful version with the R2 model that featured either an i5 or i7 CPU, a GTX 860M, or even a 960 for higher-end versions, still maxing out at 8 gigabytes of RAM from the factory, and featured an SSD alongside the HDD. These PCs are usually quite small as they were meant to be used in your living room like an actual dedicated console. However, it did feature PC hardware as to be compatible with PC games from the Steam store. These PCs, by the way, were always upgradable, which means that you can purchase aftermarket parts to increase things like the performance, the storage, or just add more RAM. The Steam controller was an important part of the equation, as it is the device that ties the whole experience together. However, when the controller itself was first unveiled, it was not well received due to its clunky design, which caused it to be delayed by an entire year. Valve eventually returned with a full redesign, one that was much better than the original, and many would even argue that it is still much better than most controllers out there, including the Xbox Ones and PlayStation 4 controllers. This controller has a very interesting shape. It is chunky and initially has a very awkward grip, but it becomes a very comfortable one on your hands as it just naturally adjusts to its shape. You have 2 trackpads on this controller, a very different feature from your standard controllers, and both have haptic feedback, which do feel very accurate, as close as you can get to using an actual mouse even. These are also pressable, if you prefer the feeling of a physical button instead of just vibrations. In the center, you get an analog stick, ABXY buttons, start and select, and the Steam button for navigation. You also get your standard set of shoulder buttons and triggers, these of which are analog triggers. You also get 2 programmable buttons around the back, although the the entirety of this controller is customizable for the most part. This was the best product to come out of Valve's endeavor with this concept, as there are so many community-driven mappings for this controller based on so many games on Steam to really make the most out of it. This controller works both wired and wirelessly, utilizing this dongle if desired, but it also features AA batteries, which is very convenient since they are easy to reach and last longer than your typical lithium-ion batteries. The Steam machines of 2014 were certainly interesting, and it was quite a valiant effort of introducing PC hardware to the console market, just selling it as essentially a console replacement, but it played PC games instead. However, the implementation came with a lot of issues, so many that they were just impossible to ignore. Steam machines had a few major issues that unfortunately killed them for the foreseeable future. For one, there wasn't a singular Steam machine model with the same specs across the board, but instead, because so many hardware makers made their own Steam machines, that meant that everyone's Steam machines had different specs. Some manufacturers had multiple models of their own Steam machines at varying price points, which, unlike how we typically purchase consoles, just complicated the process for everyone, since you would have to know if a game runs well based on certain specs and such, as long as you can of course afford that model. Prices were also a major issue, since these machines ranged in price between $500 to around $1,000 on average, but premium versions existed at anywhere in the thousands of dollars, which was just absurd for something like this. One major blow to Valve and the Steam machines was the fact that many manufacturers were starting to jump ship quickly after the launch of these machines. It all started with Dell, who took a massive loan of roughly $25 billion so that the company could become private, could not sit on expensive hardware that wasn't selling very well. Dell started shipping the remainder of their Steam machine stock with Windows 8.1 and an Xbox 360 controller instead of doing so with SteamOS, so that it would sell to a broader audience of people more easily. Many other manufacturers just followed suit, including Falcon, among others, just simply dropped out of this whole ordeal with Valve, while others did try to stick around. By 2015, we did get the actual Steam controller, and with its launch also came the announcement of the Steam Link, a device that streams games from your PC to your TV for easy remote play in your living room. Now, the issue with this device is that Steam machine makers were left too dry, as this made their expensive machines irrelevant here. This $50 box fulfills the purposes of having a dedicated living room PC, because if you already own a PC anywhere in your house, this just makes it far easier and cheaper to deliver PC games to your living room. So why would you buy a much more expensive separate PC instead? Many more manufacturers weren't carrying Steam machines anymore by this point, with little support coming to games running on the Steam machines due to Valve relying on developers to make proper ports for these Linux systems, and most of these ports being quite unoptimized. There just wasn't really a future in sight for this concept. It is said that in the first 7 months of the Steam machine's official launch, they only sold around 50,000 units, which is a tiny fraction of what the PS4 and the Xbox One had achieved in their first day. By 2018, Valve delisted Steam machines from their page, and they were quickly forgotten, and the Steam controller was also eventually discontinued. This was the case for years until they recently made a resurgence. After the failure of the Steam machines, Valve launched a compatibility layer for Linux known as Proton, which essentially allows Windows-based games to run at near-native performance levels on Windows without developers having to do anything to make it happen. This eventually paved the way for the Steam Deck to come about in 2021, a full-fledged handheld gaming PC that runs on Linux but plays a massive amount of games from the Steam store. The Steam Deck sold quite well, just considering what it was, and it absolutely inspired more companies to jump in with their own handheld PCs to try and compete against it. The Steam Deck is built by Valve, not by other partners, so this was entirely owned and managed by them. This ended up working really well for them. Just a few years later, in 2025, they announced that the Steam machine would be returning, but just like the Steam Deck, Valve would be manufacturing these machines in-house. Just as before, it would be utilizing PC hardware and is going to be running on Linux, with Valve's own options for specs. They also announced a brand new Steam controller controller that has launched as of the publishing of this video, and that has been received incredibly well thus far. With the ridiculous RAM and storage costs, it is still unknown if these machines will be priced in ways that make sense to most people, especially considering that they recently raised the prices of Steam Decks by hundreds of dollars to compensate for this. With a PC that is clearly meant to be more powerful than that, it is expected to cost a lot of money, which has caused Valve to delay the launch altogether. But there is a lot of excitement in the air for this system, since the Steam Deck was so well received and the gaming landscape looks much different now than it did when it originally launched. But what if I told you that all of this excitement has almost entirely dissipated? The Steam Machine's price was finally announced, and the base configuration of 512GB costs $1,049 without a controller. This is far more expensive than people were hoping for, and frankly, even more so than what they were expecting. This isn't really Valve's fault, as memory and storage prices are very inflated at this time. However, no one is really recommending this machine. Regardless of the reasons why it needed to be this expensive, it doesn't really make sense for a lot of people to buy one. This machine was rated to be considerably more powerful than the Steam Deck, but in a lot of ways, it might just make more sense to buy an actual console instead, since they're cheaper and already have the power necessary to run modern games. Many are also upset that Valve didn't try to subsidize the Steam Machine so that it would be cheaper and would increase its install base. It probably just isn't really sustainable in the long run to sell the system for less than the current asking price. I myself have accepted this, but I also know that I won't be buying one at all at these current prices, even though I was absolutely interested in getting one of these for myself. We don't really know how things will turn out for the new Steam Machine when it does actually reach people's hands, but its future may be promising if everything regarding pricing works out in the end, and by that what I mean is that those prices have to come down eventually. Valve already overcame a lot of the issues with their original machines, which include pricing, compatibility, and partnerships that fell through. Now, considering the colossal failure that the original Steam machines were for the company, seeing that they are this willing to come back in and disrupt the market in their own way is absolutely incredible. I look forward to seeing what Valve can actually accomplish with the Steam Machine and their new Steam controller, but really only time will tell. Maybe the memory crisis will ease out over time, and this could justify significant price decrease on the Steam machines as they are now. But as of now, it really does remain to be seen how actual customers will vote with their wallets. I believe that this was the right time to talk about the story of the Steam Machine, as everyone was looking forward to its new iteration until they found out how much it was going to cost and whether or not all of it would actually be worth it for the general consumer. However, with so many people pretty much considering this console to be dead on arrival, and with Valve even taking back a few of their performance claims, as of now, it doesn't seem to be as promising for this new iteration of the Steam Machine. So really, as I said earlier, only time will tell. I love making these mini documentaries for you guys, and at some point I would like to touch on the system that harbored a lot of the issues that caused the games industry to crash in the 1980s. We will be talking about this system very soon, so please make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss that mini documentary when it comes out. Now, thank you so much for watching. Leave your suggestions in the comments for future bite-sized documentaries, and do consider pressing the hype button on this video to boost it in the algorithm, and sharing it also helps out a ton. Until next time.